He stood like a stone statue, unresponsive to ridicule and provocation. But when one of the tourists decided to try to take the gun right out of his hands, Michael didn't just push him away, he did it so lightning fast that even his aggressor didn't realize what had happened. In that second, when the guards had already taken the intruder out, all eyes turned to the guard, but none of them were judgmental. On the contrary, people began to admire his resilience, and what happened next changed not only him, but also the perception of everyone who witnessed the incident. But what happened next will shake you to the core. But let's start from the beginning. London. Buckingham Palace. The heart of the United Kingdom, where history and modernity merge into one seamless flow, like a river that knows no boundaries. Here, surrounded by hundreds of tourists, drenched in the scent of perfume and hustle, stands Michael. The guard. A man in a crisp uniform, with a massive bear-skin hat and a rifle that seems to be an extension of his body. He isn't just standing there. He symbolizes something far greater: discipline, honor, loyalty to tradition. His stoic stance, his gaze fixed ahead, everything about him transforms into a stone statue that, seemingly, cannot be moved by time or external distractions. Michael, a guard with 10 years of service, was a master of his craft. His entire life wasn't just about duty, it was almost a philosophy. He knew his face could not show emotion. He knew his body had to remain still, no matter what happened around him. In his world, there was no room for weakness. He was part of a great machine, part of a living embodiment of the British Empire. He could hear the tourists walking by, the sound of their phones snapping photos in his direction. Another burst of laughter, shouts, and the pounding footsteps. These people don't stop. To them, the spectacle was simply entertainment. There were hundreds, thousands of them, and each one thought they had the right to disturb this man who, in their eyes, was simply standing there doing nothing. Michael fought the urge to glance at them, which would be a breach of protocol. Instead, he silently repeated to himself like a mantra, "Don't move. Don't react. Are you crazy? Smile for once," shouted one of the tourists, with some unclear tone in his voice, whether mocking or simply from boredom. The guard remained still, like a statue. His gaze was cold, and inside, just emptiness. He hadn't expected them to be kind, but today, as every other day, he met them with the same silence. This was his job. He was like a wall that they kept crashing into with their silly, sharp words. The crowd grew bolder, eagerly recording him on their phones. New tourists joined, trying to be part of the show, swiping their smartphone screens and commenting on how amusing it was to see this guard, standing in his heavy boots, as if he weren't even human. But Michael did not move. He didn't give in to the pressure, despite the irritation beginning to build inside. He could feel their gazes cutting through him, no matter how hard they tried to break his balance. All of this was part of his job, part of the discipline he carried with respect. "This is your life. This is your duty," his inner voice echoed. No petty provocation could divert him from his path. And no matter how hard they tried to provoke him, Michael knew one thing: at this moment on his post, he was more important than any tourist, more important than their laughter and shouts. He was a living reminder that there was still room in this world for traditions, for courage, and for silent resilience. The tension in the air grew with every passing second. A group of tourists, noticing that their actions had provoked not even the slightest reaction from the guard, became increasingly persistent. Their laughter, mocking comments, and loud shouts aimed at him grew louder. Michael's gaze remained as indifferent as ever, like that of a statue, but inside, his irritation was steadily rising. He knew he couldn't react. It was his duty. But with every new scream, every gesture, it felt like the tip of a knife, digging deeper into his patience. From the crowd, a young guy stepped forward, clearly deciding to become the center of attention. Wearing a London Calling t-shirt, with a smirk on his face and an attitude that screamed, "I'm in control here," he slowly approached Michael. "Hey, man, how do you even walk around with that thing? Let me try," he said mockingly, staring the guard in the face and deliberately reaching for the rifle. Michael, without moving an inch, felt his body tense. That was the last straw. The tourist clearly thought his paying customer status gave him the right to do whatever he wanted. He didn't realize that the man standing before him was much more than just a photo prop. He was part of living history. He was a guard, who wore his uniform and carried his weapon not for amusement, but to protect the honor and traditions of his country. The tourist, clearly not expecting such a quick response, tried to grab the rifle. But before his hand even touched the cold metal, Michael had seized it with lightning speed. "Get out. Now," he said in a calm but firm voice, as if each word was sharply cut. His face remained implacable. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make any sudden moves, but there was such force in his words that the guy recoiled, stunned, struggling to find his words. He clearly hadn't anticipated that his provocations would meet not just silence, but a hard, almost merciless response. But that was just the beginning. As always in situations like this, security didn't take long to arrive. Several guards quickly approached the group, moving with professional precision, as if everything had been planned in advance. The tourist hadn't even realized what had happened before they grabbed him by the shoulders and started escorting him off the grounds, ignoring his protests. Michael didn't flinch. He stood at his post as if nothing had happened. Watching the intruder swiftly and silently being removed from the area, he felt only one thing: confidence that everything had unfolded just as it should have. This wasn't just a demonstration of strength, it was the order he was devoted to. The kind of order that remains unshaken, no matter how hard people try to break it. The security was quick and efficient, no unnecessary words or fuss, just action. The tourist didn't even have time to process what had happened before he found himself outside the palace grounds. No lengthy explanations were needed because order had been restored. In its absence, there was only the shadow of his actions, and no one doubted that it was all over. Michael turned back to his post and adjusted his hat, as though this was just another day for him. He felt neither joy nor anger. It was his job. He didn't need to be a hero. He was a guard. He was the one who was ready to stand, no matter what. And as the tourist was led away from the palace, and the crowd started to disperse, returning to their business, Michael remained at his post. Silence once again filled the square. There was something majestic in that silence. He couldn't afford to relax. He had to stay sharp. Always. His duty had been fulfilled. Everything had happened exactly as it was supposed to. Michael continued to stand at his post, his gaze still cold and focused, as if no event around him could affect his inner stability. Everything had returned to its usual state, tourists surrounded him once again, but something had changed in the atmosphere. The irony and mockery had disappeared from their eyes. Instead of snapping pictures of him with taunts, they watched him with noticeable respect. Some whispered to each other, while others stood, mesmerized. There was an indistinct energy in the air, as if the very traditions had taken on a more tangible form. Michael sensed the shift but continued to stand, showing no sign of reaction. He knew his task wasn't to be part of the spectacle, nor to get caught up in others' emotions. He was on duty. And that was how he was meant to remain. Suddenly, a middle-aged man, with a small beard and a light coat, stepped out of the crowd and approached the guard. His steps were confident, but his gaze was soft, like someone who had long understood the value of human dignity. "You know how many people give in to such provocations. But you just stood there. There's something to that," he said, his voice full of respect. Michael lifted his eyes to meet the man's. This was one of those rare moments when a person expressed kindness without expecting anything in return. He nodded slightly, just enough for the men to understand his answer. "Thank you," Michael thought to himself, though he didn't say it out loud. He wasn't one to talk about his long service, especially to strangers. But sometimes, even silent recognition was important. There were moments when you were seen and appreciated for your resilience, even if you never asked for it. "This is my job," he finally said, not expecting applause and not thinking about how it might sound like a routine answer, rather than an expression of pride. The men smiled, nodding in response, and after a brief pause, he walked away. He was the only one who approached, but his words echoed in Michael's mind like something more than just gratitude. Everything that had happened wasn't random. He knew, it was those moments, when someone recognizes the importance of silent endurance, that gave meaning to it all. Michael silently adjusted his uniform, as if returning to himself. His posture became unchanged once more. Resilience, without unnecessary words or gestures. He was there, and that was what mattered. Right before him, there were no people with camera phones, no crowd of tourists, but the very British tradition standing right before him, invisible but just as real. He was their living embodiment. Suddenly, the public stopped seeing him as just part of the attraction. Their eyes reflected understanding. They no longer saw him as merely a guard whose role was to stand at his post. Now they began to realize that standing before them was a living symbol. A symbol of something deeply important, unshakable, steadfast, silent, yet powerful. The video of the moment when a tourist tried to grab the rifle from Michael quickly spread across the internet. It first appeared on a popular news website, and then, like a snowball, it rolled through social media, racking up millions of views. People were shocked not only by the audacity of the tourist but also by the lightning-fast reaction of the guard, who, without saying a word, put the provocateur in his place with one swift movement. Comments flooded the threads, some supported Michael, others condemned the tourist's behavior. Social media users quickly divided into two camps. One admired his resilience and discipline, while the other boldly argued that his behavior symbolized the ideals of Britain, which had not surrendered to the pressures of time. The tourist, in turn, became the target of mockery and condemnation. The views on his actions were completely different from what he might have expected, trying to take a weapon from someone standing guard over history. People joked in the comments. Even on his own social media pages, biting jokes began to appear, and his attempts to justify himself seemed absurd. Soon, apologies to Michael emerged, becoming a topic of discussion across the internet, receiving tens of thousands of responses, most of which boiled down to one word: too late. The tourist had finally realized that his actions had not only angered a single guard but had dishonored the unshakable honor and symbol of the United Kingdom, which should never be demeaned. Meanwhile, the Buckingham Palace security team provided a report on the incident. The process of removing the trespasser from the grounds was swift and quiet. The situation seemed to have been resolved for the tourist, but its consequences were just beginning to unfold. It was soon decided that an investigation would take place, and the tourist, who had broken the rules, would face an official review and likely a fine. At the same time, Michael returned to his post, showing no sign of weakness. He was the same man who had not allowed the provocation to shake his resolve. There was nothing new in his eyes, no indication that what had happened had disturbed him. He simply stood, motionless and unwavering, as if embodying those very ideals that had always transcended time and change. His gaze remained stone-cold, and his body stood still, as it always had. The crowd passing by began to behave differently. People filming him on their phones no longer laughed. There was something else in their eyes: respect. Many still took photos, but now they were no longer just tourists looking for another meme with the guard. They admired him. Everything around him felt grand, almost sacred. Michael felt this shift, this change in the atmosphere. He knew that in the eyes of the people, he was no longer just a guard on duty. He was a living symbol, proving that traditions and honor were not just words. They were values that endure, no matter what else happens. The silence surrounding him was now not just quiet but an expression of the deepest respect. And at that moment, adjusting his hat as always, composed and dignified, Michael returned to his duty. He stood at his post again, and no one could forget that for him, this was more than just fulfilling his duty. It was the continuation of a tradition that stood watch over his country. In that moment, he knew, his endurance had not been in vain. With every glance, with every snapshot on the phones of those around him, his actions became part of that invisible, but unbreakable legacy that remains alive, despite the challenges of time. And so, standing at his post, Michael once again became not just a guard, but a living symbol of the unchanging strength and discipline of Great Britain.